Hello. Yes, witness the power of my electrified microphone. So, hi everyone. It's been a weekend. I hope you all had an outstanding weekend. Maybe if we're lucky, we'll get some weekends above freezing before too long here. That might be nice. So I'm gonna show you a video, a short video. We might not watch all of it just because we're a little, always pressed for time. But that is going to happen during the beginning of class today. And then after that, I'm going to use whatever time is left to show you some additional things related to editing video in Premiere. Before we kind of go on with that, does anyone have any sort of general questions or anything they'd like to ask me about? All right, pass the scan. So then I'll go ahead and just get started with this video. So I will make the lights a little dimmer, and we'll go for this. Of course, they have things for sale. Oh, that doesn't sound like it has sound. Hang on. Hang on just 1 second. Sadly, the lo-fi hip-hop must go away, and this must turn on. Okay.
To combine or edit existing materials to produce something new. The term remix originally applied to music. It rose to prominence late last century during the heyday of hip-hop, the first popular music form to incorporate sampling from existing recordings. Early example, the Sugar Hill Gang samples the bass riff from Chic's Good Times in the 1979 hit, Rapper's Delight.
Now what you hear is not a test, I'm rapping to the beat. And me, the groove, and my friends are gonna try to move your feet.
Since then, that same bass line has been sampled dozens of times. Skip ahead to the present and anybody can remix anything, music, video, photos, whatever, and distribute it globally pretty much instantly. You don't need expensive tools, you don't need a distributor, you don't even need skills. Remixing is a folk art, anybody can do it. Yet these techniques, copying materials, transforming them, combining them, are the same ones used at any level of creation. You might even say, everything is a remix. To explain, let's start in England in 1968. Jimmy Page recruits John Paul Jones, Robert Plant, and John Bonham to form Led Zeppelin. They play extremely loud blues music that will soon be known as Wait. Let's start in Paris in 1961. William Burroughs coins the term heavy metal in the novel The Soft Machine, a book composed using the cut-up technique, taking existing writing and literally chopping it up and rearranging it. So in 1961, William Burroughs not only invents the term heavy metal, the brand of music Zeppelin and a few other groups would pioneer, he also produces an early remix. Back to Zeppelin. By the mid-1970s, Led Zeppelin are the biggest touring rock band in America, yet many critics and peers label them as rip-offs. The case goes like this. The opening and closing sections of Bringin' On Home are lifted from a tune by Willie Dixon entitled, not coincidentally, Bringin' On Home.
I done bought my ticket, I got my load.
The Lemon Song lifts numerous lyrics from Howlin' Wolf's Killin' Floor. Black Mountainside lifts its melody from Black Waterside, a traditional arranged by Bert Jansch. Dazed and Confused features different lyrics but is clearly an uncredited cover of the same titled song by Jake Holmes. Holmes filed suit over 40 years later in 2010.
Been dazed and confused for so long, it's not true.
I'm dazed and confused, hanging on by a thread.
And the big one, Stairway to Heaven, pulls its opening from Spirit's Taurus. The estate of songwriter Randy California filed suit in 2014. Zeppelin clearly copied a lot of other people's material. But that alone isn't unusual. Only two things distinguish Zeppelin from their peers. Firstly, when Zeppelin used someone else's material, they didn't attribute songwriting to the original artist. Most British blues groups were recording lots of covers, but unlike Zeppelin, they didn't claim to have written them. Secondly, Zeppelin didn't modify their versions enough to claim they were original. Many bands knock off acts that came before them, but they tend to emulate the general sound rather than specific lyrics or melodies. Zeppelin copied without making fundamental changes. So these two things, covers, performances of other people's material, and knockoffs, copies that stay within legal boundaries, these are long-standing examples of legal remixing. This stuff accounts for almost everything the entertainment industry produces, and that's where we're headed in part 2. Wait, one last thing. In the wake of their enormous success, Led Zeppelin went from the copier to the copied. First in the 70s with groups like Aerosmith and Heart and Boston, then during the 80s heavy metal craze, and on into the era of sampling. Here's the beats from When the Levee Breaks, getting sampled and remixed. Perhaps it's because movies are so massively expensive to make. Perhaps it's because graphic novels, TV shows, video games, books, and the like are such rich sources of material. Or perhaps it's because audiences just prefer the familiar. Whatever the reason, most box office hits rely heavily on existing material. Of the 10 highest grossing films per year from the last 10 years, 74 out of 100 are either sequels or remakes of earlier films or adaptations of comic books, video games, books, and so on. Transforming the old into the new is Hollywood's greatest talent. At this point, we've got 3 sequels to a film adapted from a theme park attraction. We've got a movie musical based on a musical which was based on a movie. We've got 2 sequels to a film that was adapted from an animated TV show based on a line of toys. We've got a movie based on 2 books, one of which was based on a blog, which was inspired by the other book that was adapted into the film.
Julie and Julia.
Do you follow? We've got 11 Star Trek films, 12 Friday the 13th, and 23 James Bonds. We've got stories that have been told, retold, transformed, referenced, and subverted since the dawn of cinema. We've seen vampires morph from hideous monsters to caped bedroom invaders, to campy jokes, to sexy hunks, to sexier hunks. Of the few box office hits that aren't sequels, remakes, or adaptations, the word original wouldn't spring to mind to describe them. These are genre movies, and they stick to pretty standard templates. Genres then break up into subgenres with their own, even more specific conventions. So within the category of horror films, we have subgenres like supernatural, slasher, zombie, and creature feature. All have standard elements that are appropriated, transformed, and subverted. Let's use the biggest film of the decade as an example. Now, it's not a sequel, remake, or adaptation, but it is a genre film, sci-fi, and most tellingly, it's a member of a tiny subgenre where sympathetic white people feel bad about all the murder, pillaging, and annihilation being done on their behalf. I call this subgenre Sorry About Colonialism. I'm talking about movies like Dances with Wolves, The Last Samurai, The Last of the Mohicans, Dune, Lawrence of Arabia, A Man Called Horse, and even Fern Gully and Pocahontas. Films are built on other films, as well as on books, TV shows, actual events, plays, whatever. This applies to everything from the lowliest genre film right on up to revered indie fare. And it even applies to massively influential blockbusters, the kinds of films that reshape pop culture. Which brings us to... Even now, Star Wars endures as a work of impressive imagination, but many of its individual components are as recognizable as the samples in a remix. The foundation for Star Wars comes from Joseph Campbell. He popularized the structures of myth in his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Star Wars follows the outline of the monomyth, which consists of stages like the Call to Adventure, Supernatural Aid, the Belly of the Whale, the Road of Trials, the Meeting with the Goddess, and a bunch more. Also huge influences were the Flash Gordon serials from the 30s and Japanese director Akira Kurosawa. Star Wars plays much like an updated version of Flash Gordon, right down to the soft wipes and the opening titles design. From Kurosawa, we get masters of spiritual martial arts, a low-ranking bickering duo, more soft wipes, a beneath the floorboards hideaway, and a boastful baddie getting his arm chopped off.
You just watch yourself. We're wanted men. I have the death sentence on 12 systems.
War films and westerns were also huge sources for Star Wars. The scene where Luke discovers his slaughtered family resembles this scene from The Searchers. And the scene where Han Solo shoots Greedo resembles this scene from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The climactic airstrikes in the Dam Busters, 633 Squadron, and the bridges at Toko Ri play very similarly to the run in the Death Star. And in many cases, existing shots were even used as templates for Star Wars special effects. There's also many other elements clearly derived from various films. We have a tin man like the Tin Woman in Metropolis, a couple shots inspired by 2001, a grab the girl and swing scene like this one in The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, a holographic projection kind of like the one in Forbidden Planet, a rally resembling this one in Triumph of the Will, and cute little robots much like those in Silent Running. George Lucas copied materials, he combined them, he transformed them. Without the films that preceded it, there could be no Star Wars. Creation requires influence. Everything we make is a remix of existing creations, our lives, and the lives of others. As Isaac Newton once said, we stand on the shoulders of giants, which is what he was doing when he adapted that saying from Bernard de Chartres. In part 3, we'll further explore this idea and chart the blurry boundary between the original and the unoriginal. George Lucas was the most movie-saturated filmmaker of his era, but that baton has since been passed to Quentin Tarantino's remix master thesis is Kill Bill, which is probably the closest thing Hollywood has to a mashup. Packed with elements pulled from countless films, Kill Bill raises filmic sampling to new heights of sophistication. The killer nurse scene in particular is almost entirely a recombination of elements from existing films. The basic action is the same as this scene from Black Sunday, where a woman disguised as a nurse attempts to murder a patient with a syringe of red fluid. Daryl Hannah's eye patch is a nod to the lead character in They Call Her One Eye, and the tune she's whistling is taken from the 1968 thriller Twisted Nerve.
Hold tight.
Capping it off, the split screen effect is modeled on techniques used by Brian De Palma in an assortment of films, including Carrie.
Okay, so we're just going to kind of watch the first half of it. It is going to be included on the final exam, so if you get a chance, you can go ahead and just watch the other 20 minutes at your leisure. I think I can guarantee you there is at least one question about this video on the midterm. But I particularly wanted to kind of cover the stuff about video, film, and music. The video kind of goes on to like draw a broader brush about intellectual property, which is super interesting. It's just not like immediately relevant to what we're doing with video and sound. So, yeah, questions? Another reason not to like Quentin Tarantino, in case you needed one. When we get going today, of course, I'll post the video on Canvas. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of pick up from where we left off. So I'm going to be opening Premiere. And because we had a project that we saved, I believe it was called My Stupid Project, it should come right up in the startup screen. Might take a second. I guess I could probably help things out by just quitting some applications on my computer. Let me get rid of this one in particular. Okay, so as promised, it's over here in the sort of recent project listing. Of course, we could also, find it if we needed to. And here it is. You'll notice that we have a sort of yellow screen of death when we first start up. That's totally normal. That's just Premiere sort of like looking for and loading the video files that we're using. And you can see in this project in particular, we've loaded quite a few files in here. I just went ahead and loaded the entire folder. So that's going to take a minute. So the first thing that I usually like to do is to just go ahead and kind of watch the video as it is now. And then we have this sort of other burning thing. Okay, so basically that's it. I think I had just we had done a couple of edits, we laid a couple things on tracks, and we kind of just had dragged these giant clips on here onto the window, but we didn't really sort of think about any particular plan for them per se. As you may have already noticed, I'm not super into plans when I make art. I'm more about judgment as I go along. So what I think I'm going to do is I think when this changes to this panning shot rather than this overhead shot, I think I'm going to go ahead and cut it, and I'll use the cut tool. So that's over here, or you can type the C key. And I'm going to go to the Move tool, which is the V key, or you can, of course, go over here to the toolbar. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. And then from there, I guess I probably, I might go ahead and get rid of this this wind blowing through trees thing, because I think we just had this sort of like peaceful moment, everything's on fire, and we're flying over the mall. So that seems like a sort of reasonable, nonsensical narrative to me. So I think probably I will cut this wind blowing through trees at the point when we stop seeing it. So if I pan through here, that point is somewhere over here. So I can use the cut tool again. and the move tool, and just get rid of this. Now, also, I remember making these cuts just to show y'all how to make cuts. And I feel like I don't really want these cuts here. There's no reason to have them here, and it just makes it more complicated for me to kind of select 4 things rather than selecting 1 thing. So if I wanted to make this all one solid video clip, it would be pretty easy to do. I could just select and then delete these 3 clips and use my Ripple Edit tool to kind of buy back what I lost from the wind blowing through the trees. And now that, the Ripple Edit tool, just to give you a little refresher, it sort of happens, or you get access to it whenever you hover on the side of a clip. Also, one thing to kind of like think about when you're in this space is that you can, of course, sort of modulate the amount of real estate that you're giving each video track by adjusting it over here. And that can be a really good thing to do. All right, well, I think we're done with sort of like the prep work here, and we could probably start to just get some other stuff down. So I'm going to double-click a clip in my clip browser, and I can just go ahead and play through it. You'll notice that nothing important happens in the first 5 to 8 seconds. And then we start to kind of get this like cat rain thing happening. This, if it looks familiar, it should. We used a still from this in the Photoshop project. So I think what I would like to do is to limit the clip that I bring in to not the entire clip. I want to use a selection of the clip. So if I have the playhead here, I can do what's called mark in. And then I can also, conversely, kind of mark out if I want it to stop at a certain point. And this is really just like, then I can take the clip from the asset browser, if it has ins and outs, and it will sort of observe that for me. So that's nice. Just a couple of quick things. It seems like right now, my sort of spinning maul of death has sort of taken that over, and all I have to do is just add a couple of nodes to that, to the opacity slider selector thing, and then it should move in a more predictable way. If I wanted to make it a little bit nicer, I could have it start sliding down at the point where the clip actually comes in. So then I wouldn't necessarily see that change. There we go. That's what I'm talking about. So the first thing I'd like to do with this clip, I think, is I'd like to speed it up considerably, because these things are like on the slow train to wherever they're going. And that was sort of, intentional for the purposes of my own work, but I think for this, it would be better to have them move a lot faster. So if I right-click the clip and then go to speed and duration, I can go ahead and let's give it 200% to start with. And then I can go ahead and kind of clip this to the edge and basically cut and paste this thing. And in this case, I'd like to have this one go backwards, and I'd like to have it go even faster. So I can go back to that speed duration setting. By the way, it's going to inherit whatever it got from the cut and paste settings. But we can maybe take it to 400% and then go reverse. And so that will give us, like, hopefully, something that looks like it's going in reverse and much faster. There we go. So probably I could even take these 2 clips and make them actually go even faster. So we'll go one iteration where they're just kind of like speeding out of control. So I can put these both at, let's see, 400%, and I'm still going to have to address this one to make it faster. You can't kind of individually address them within if you select them both. So here I could go to speed duration, and then this would be 800% if I'm following the same logic. So this should be kind of moving along quite quickly. Now you'll notice that there's a little bit of skipping happening. That I can tell you a couple of things about, because it will probably happen to you too. The reason that skipping is happening is for a couple of reasons. One, we're working at a reasonable resolution. We're working in full HD. So we're asking a lot of the computer. The other reason that it is happening is because you can see this yellow bar here. This yellow bar means that if you've put effects or made changes to the video clips, that if it's yellow, it means it has not rendered yet, which means that it hasn't actually like written out the frames that you need to play the effect. So when you start seeing skipping like that, I would check this top bar of your timeline sequence, and if it needs to be rendered, you can do this. You can go up to sequence, and you would want to render in to out. You can also just render a selection if you want to, but in most cases, you just want to render the entire thing. Disclaimer, if you have 10 minutes of video with effects on it, this could take quite a while. We're only rendering about, it looks like 30 seconds of video. And you can see it's like, I'm going to have to think about this for a while. So it's better to go ahead and render things because then you just have access to that sort of playback preview in a high quality. Right, so now you can see our entire sequence is rendered, and the playback is going to be a lot more smooth, and in general, it's not going to be skipping. If it skips when it's rendered, then you probably just don't have enough RAM, which is just something you'll have to live with, basically. So, okay, we've got kitties coming up, kitties coming out. Cats everywhere. So there's a couple of other things that I wanted to make sure that I had a chance to show you today, and that would be, well, first, I think I'd like to show you how to work with transitions. And so in order to do that, I'm going to go ahead and just find a whole separate video. So I'll kind of double-click this so it comes up in my source browser. And I'm going to scrub through it with the playhead to kind of figure out some point where I find it like doing something interesting. And it seems like right here, that seems fine. So I'll put an out there. And I'm going to go ahead and get that down into this lower track. Now, a couple of things. One, it looks like this one came with audio, so we're going to throw this audio out. So to do that, we're just going to control-click and unlink, and then I can get in there and delete the audio. Let's look at this transition right now. Oh. That's like, we're in some kind of like action movie with birds and cats, and that's not necessarily helpful. So what we're going to work on is basically this transition. Now you can see that just a couple things that I want you to take note of. Obviously, this birds clip that we just added in here is not rendered. That makes sense because we added it after we rendered everything. So just keep an eye out for that. There's so many ways to do transitions. I mean, one way that I already showed you is to use the opacity fader. So, so you could potentially just take your pen tool and basically fade this clip up. And it would look like that. That's one way to do it. It's kind of a limited way to do transitions, and it's not usually the way that I do transitions. I think the part where I would take that into like making transitions is if I were doing something where I wanted it to look like a collage or like a long dream sequence where stuff is kind of fading up and happening, and there's all sorts of stuff going on. That technique could be really useful for that. But for this, like, let's say I just want a simple TV quality transition. Well, I would go over here to my project browser, and you can get into the effects browser. And the effects browser, as promised, it literally has all the effects. So if you're thinking about applying an effect to your video, the way that I do this transition is also the same way that you would use an effect. So if I go down to the menu for video transitions and then go to dissolve, you can see I have this dip to black transition. Dip to black is sort of the generic all-purpose kind of transition for all occasions. What does it do? It literally dips to black, and then it comes back up. When you drag this transition over here, you can then double-click it, and you can change the duration of the transition. A typical TV transition is probably under a quarter second. So you want it to basically be quick and almost unnoticeable, but you want it to be something other than that jump, right? And so that's really what dip to black is for. Sometimes the dip to black can be used as kind of a fade out as well. Whoops. So if I just pan to the end of this extremely long video, if you put it at the end of a clip, it will treat it like a fade out. So it does have some intelligence that way. Let me go ahead and zoom in here. Yep, it's there. So over here, we've kind of got this, bam, and then it's done, right? Okay, so these are all kind of incredibly useful transitions that you can use. If you're looking for super cheesy transitions like the page peel or the iris opening or stuff like that, I can totally think of reasons why you may want to use those in your project. Yeah, they're there. Go for it. Try them out. They tend to look maybe a little sort of like from the 1960s to the 1980s kind of time period, but if you're, going for that kind of a look, they could actually be really, really powerful and really interesting. So, definitely, like, unless you have a good reason to, like, taking a minimalist approach to transitions is probably a good idea, unless you're coming up with some crazy sequence where a lot of stuff is going on, right? And that sort of, then it ceases to be a transition and becomes like a collage or, an art thing, maybe. Okay, so transitions, they're there. Also, if you want to do a quick effect, again, I'm not big on effects in general. I have a colleague who actually, like, pretty much centers his whole practice around visual effects. Yeah, I just can't do it. So a good sort of effect would be maybe like the Gaussian blur. This is like a good sort of generic effect. So if we were to maybe put a Gaussian blur on this cat right here, well, you can see a couple of things. So the effect actually gets applied to the entire clip. And right now, it looks like it's set to be very subtle. You may be asking yourself, how do I change the effect? Well, double-click it to bring it up in the source browser, and then go to this tab that says Effects Controls. And from there, you can adjust or kind of dial in the effect. So let's try a 10% blur. And you can see that's actually pretty significant. You can also see that now that we've done this effect, our clip is now unrendered, right? So we'd have to go back to render everything now that we've slapped an effect on there, maybe even if you add type or that kind of stuff. Those are all things that will ask you to sort of re-render your clip. Now, you may also notice that you have access to a lot of other stuff in this effects palette. If you're sort of thinking about if you've heard of or you are interested in using keyframes, this is where you would do it. I don't have time to cover that in this class, but if you're interested in taking your project to the next level, keyframe animation is like a whole rabbit hole for you to go down. And that basically just means, like, how do you take a clip, shrink it, flip it over, make it run around the screen? The answer is keyframes, and you would access them through this window. So let's sort of think about the last thing on my laundry list of stuff that I wanted to show you today, and that is the sort of idea of using type. So Premiere has gone a really long way in the last couple of years to make type tools a lot easier to use. So they actually have this thing called a type tool. You can click it. You can move it to the screen, any point where the playhead is, and you can type stuff, and it will give you a type object. Okay? So that's pretty smooth. It used to, yeah, you don't care how it used to be. But anyway, it's a lot easier than it used to be. So yeah, now we literally just typed some stuff on the screen, and now we have this type object that we can play with. You can also see that it sort of created something like a clip for us to kind of modify, so we can make it as short or as long as we want with the Ripple Edit tool. We can also assign it, opacity keyframes, like with the pen tool, like we did here and here. Let's go ahead and play it and see what happens. There it goes. Little laggy because of that rendering thing. Okay, so, but I think you get the basic idea of how that works. So you'll notice that the sort of background of the type tool is black by default. And that we sort of said earlier that black is like nothing, right? Or that black is basically like the thing that everything sort of fades into. So if we go out here to, so basically it's transparent is what I'm trying to say. If we go back to the back of the video where there's no video clips and we create a type object, it's going to look a little bit different. I could use the type tool like I've been doing here, or I can show you just another quick way of doing this, which is to go to the, go to the, apparently you have to be actually in the sequence, which is kind of interesting. So you have to, in other words, the playhead has to be in the sort of like live area of the video. To make a new text layer, which is exactly the same thing as what we just did. So let's see. Except one quick thing, I was not, try that one more time. So just make a new text layer. So the reason that that didn't go the way that I had quite planned is that I actually neglected that I still had the old video clip selected. So in this situation where I'm just making an independent text layer, I actually don't want it to be attached to like a video clip. So that's why I moved the playhead, and then I was able to kind of create it independently. So yeah, if you create a text layer in this context, it is going to appear to have a black background. And let's see. Oh, brilliant. So again, you can make that text sort of as complicated or not complicated as you like. There are also, if you want to sort of get into it, as you can see, you can address the text just like the effect. You can address it in the effects browser. So let's just recap. If I double-click this, it'll open up the effects browser, and the effects controls panel will have that text basically waiting for me to kind of change everything about it. And you do need to actually highlight the text in order for those changes to take place. So if you want to change the font, that kind of thing. You know, for the most part, it works like a text, like any kind of other text editing tool. But yeah, you can change sort of the color by changing the fill. Changing the background is something that it sort of will ask you to like make a background for it. So most of the time you probably don't want to do that. And then yeah, you can sort of change everything about your text from this panel. So this is definitely like the way to make text. The other way, by the way, to make text is to come into the Essential Graphics palette here and go to Browse. And there are tons of templates for like moving text and moving credits and things like that. And so if you're looking for sort of like a prefabbed way to roll through a bunch of text, you don't have to sort of make it yourself the way that I just showed you. You can also go over here to Essential Graphics. And by the way, just to recap how we did that, we were in the editing preset. I double-clicked this text, and it came up with the Essential Graphics palette all by itself. And then you can click to browse. You can also click this workspace for captions and graphics. And that's going to bring up all the options for those moving titles as well. But if you just want to make some text and have a couple of things, float by, you can certainly just use the text tool. It's like the simple way to do that. So I think that was the laundry list of stuff for me. On our next class, I'm going to be showing you, we're going to kind of be like all about sound. And we're going to move over into sound. And I'm going to also take some time to show you how to export and compress your project. All right. I'll see you on Thursday, y'all.